Good morning and a very happy new year 2024 to all of you. From this video onwards, we are going to be continuing exploring keynotes of the Materia Medica, and we are going to be dealing with very different remedies, rare remedies, not often used remedies, and look at how we can identify from the given case the right kind of symptoms to take and how to identify the keynotes and finally prescribe the correct remedy for our patient. So the coming two lectures, this is one, and then the next one follows in quick succession after this, is going to be a demonstration of how the keynotes are actually related in a certain case. Keynotes do not exist in isolation in any case. They are related to each other. So when we identify a certain keynote in a particular case, prescribing purely on that one keynote will usually lead to error. However, if we can identify three keynotes or even one major keynote and couple of interesting and very prominent characteristics of the remedy, and then we are able to relate them in space and time in a way that each keynote or each characteristic, the symptoms, they are related to each other. Suppose we find three characteristic symptoms in a particular case. Maybe one of them is a keynote, and that keynote is very, very prominent in the case. And you have another two or three very important characteristic symptoms of the case. Now, what I want to mention here is that these three or four symptoms, including the keynotes, are not existing independently in space and time. They are part of one continuum and they are related to each other. So the right way of prescribing based on keynotes is always when we look at this holistically, wherein we interrelate not just the keynote, but the existing symptoms and then prescribe. And when you prescribe at that level, it becomes a holistic, complete prescription, wherein you are not only taking note of the keynote, but also the symptoms of the whole person in general. Okay, so with that in mind, let us start with a particular case, and I'm going to share my screen. So this case is a case of a lady who came to me with a very severe vertigo. She was about 76 years old, and um, the way she came to me was she called me up early in the morning and she said she was having very, very severe vertigo. Her head felt as if, everywhere she looked, everything seemed to be spinning around herself. This is what she told. Whatever she looks at, it felt as if it was spinning around her. And she was extremely prostrated, and she had just a bout of vomiting on that particular day. And this was the presentation. She came to my clinic. I asked her what the main problem was. She told me that she had started experiencing vertigo since the day before. And it started the day before evening. She gave me the following modalities. She said vertigo is initiated every time she rises from a sleeping position, and vertigo lasts for about 2 to 3 minutes. Vertigo, it feels as if any object that she was looking at, like for example, she took the example of a fan. While she was looking at it, it felt as if it was spinning around her, even though she knew that the fan was stationary. So she gave me these modalities, and I took, basically the three prominent symptoms that I could find in her case. There was not many symptoms in her case at all. The prominent symptoms were the vertigo, which I just described to you. There was a lot of tiredness and fatigue, prostration. And more importantly, she had vomiting and there was gastric derangement. So as you can see, I took those in complete repertory. This is from complete repertory 2019, and I repertorized and I come up with these remedies. As you can see, you come up with a lot of polycrest remedies and a few rare remedies, not often used remedies. Now, just with this, how would you be able to prescribe on the case? In such cases, when I see a very prominent, peculiar symptom, in this case, vertigo, as if she was in a room and objects seem to spin around her. It's a very, very peculiar symptom. And I have taken this symptom and put it into Kent's repertory, converting it into a rubric. Only one single remedy comes out of it. It is cadmium sulfide. The rubric is nurse repertory, vertigo in room and bed seem to spin around. Now, cadmium sulfide is a very prominent remedy for gastric derangements of the most severe kind. In this case, she did not have gastric derangement of the very severe variety, but her vertigo was very, very, very severe. Okay. So anyway, I looked at the materia medica of cadmium sulfide, and I wanted to know whether all the salient points were covered in the case, whether it was extreme prostration, vertigo with nausea was covered, vertigo as if objects seemed to turn around, that was covered, whether the gastric derangement was covered. And yes, it was covered. I wanted to also investigate the only one modality that she actually pointed out about how the vertigo starts. She said, when I lie down perfectly still, sir, I don't get vertigo. But the moment I wake up, I get very, very severe vertigo. So usually I confirm these kind of confirmatory keynotes with bogus synoptic key because it's a very, very simple and easy way of confirming. And that particular confirmation was given in the bogus synoptic key. As you can see, it says there is a problem in the stomach. That's one keynote. There is worse raising up and worse least motion. And it talks about nausea that compels quite to avoid vomiting. It also talks about craves little drinks of cold water which are vomited at once. So these are all covered. Now, should we give cadmium sulfide based on these? It's a very strong case for cadmium sulfuricum. And if you do know that all the modalities are covered and the very prominent keynote is covered, it is a very, very strong indicator of the remedy. Now, be that as it may, I usually confirm the remedy in couple of ways. In this case, I did not actually confirm the remedy. I gave her cadmium sulfuricum 1 m single dose because she was in severe distress. And there are reasons for why I did not, wait to confirm the remedy through other means. I had already verified it through the materia medica, and I had looked at the prominent keynote, it was covered. There were some other aspects of the case. She had symptoms mainly related to the vertigo. It was a very, very narrow case. And there's a reason which exists because of in the presence of a narrow, delimited range of symptoms, wherein you have symptoms pertaining only to a certain organ, you can be fairly confident at prescribing a remedy which is targeted at that particular pathology. And you don't necessarily need to look at a polycrest to cover those symptoms because the remedy or the symptoms are so narrow that it would have to be one of the lesser known remedies. More on this later. I will explain why my thought process in a little bit detail later on. But I did not wait to confirm the remedy through another means, which is what I'm going to talk to you next. Okay. But I gave her the remedy and then I set about, confirming whether that remedy was indeed, spot on. I gave her cadmium sulfuricum 1 m, single dose under the tongue, and I asked her to sleep so that in about 40 minutes, we would get to know whether, the vertigo was really present or not. So now moving forward. So generally, whenever I have a certain case and whenever I am in some kind of doubt and the situation is serious, I usually use the cycles and segments analysis, or what is known as the Herscu module in Radar Opus, to confirm the remedy. Okay. And I also make use of a certain tips that were given to me by Dr. Paul Herscu in the course that I am taking from him, wherein I can be reasonably confident that this is the remedy. Okay. So let us look at the cycles and segments analysis. It's a different way of looking at the keynotes of the remedy. And so while looking at it, the case, we can see that the case has three prominent areas. One is the circumstances that bring the vertigo on, which is the modalities. She gave us one modality, and we all know that the modalities are very, very, very important in the prescription of the correct remedy. Now, that one modality was there, and this was what brought the vertigo on. Then I considered the vertigo itself, and then I looked at another aspect of the case, what the vertigo led to. Now, these three separate aspects of the case, these are known in the cycles and segments way of looking at the case as segments. Okay. Now, in each segment, you can put related symptoms which express the same idea. Okay. As an example, let us assume that there is a particular person who is better by discharges. Okay. And the discharges is one central idea in the case. Discharges make the person feel better. For such a case, if you consider that the person feels better after having the onset of menstrual discharge, that the person feels better by expressing his or her anger, that the person feels better by talking, then all these three experience, these express rather than experience the same idea. Now, this same idea can be thought of as one segment. This is actually the symptom, if you want to call it. You can call it actually one segment. You can call it a bunch of related symptoms which express the same idea, or you can call it as one super symptom if you wish. But this would be one segment in the cycles and segments analysis. Now, within that segment, you keep or you add all related areas in such a related related rubrics rather, which express the same idea. And you, because of the way the Herscu module is constructed, if let us say three or four ideas or rubrics, a remedy is repeated more than once, it is going to be counted only once because of what is called as a Boolean OR operation that happens between all the rubrics that you add to a particular segment. So in the example I just gave, better by discharges, all three will have lechesis as the most prominent symptom. Loquacity, better by discharges of the menstruation, and better by anger. But they will only be counted once, even if you add all these three rubrics into one segment called discharges. And that is important because we don't want to overemphasize a certain remedy while evaluating which remedy would be suitable for the whole case. So for one segment, we put all the group of related ideas together and in such a manner that a remedy that comes up within it is counted only once. So that is the main idea. So now you see I have three segments. Now vertigo turned about as if bed, which actually leads to a prostration with vomiting and tiredness. The prostration itself creates a certain weakness in the system wherein there's an existence of a modality which says that as soon as you get up, you get vertigo. While in complete rest, you don't get vertigo. The moment you raise, you get vertigo. That again turns into the way the vertigo is described, the sensation of the vertigo. That vertigo after it occurs leads to prostration. And this is a certain cycle that is happening within these three segments or super symptoms. And this particular way of repertorization, as I will show you shortly, leads to the best possible expression of the disease process, wherein the relevant remedy would be found when you repertorize. Okay. So as you see, I have taken these three segments and I have added these symptoms. I have kept it as broad as possible. Vertigo turned about as if bed in, the nature of the vertigo, the sensation. And I have taken related rubrics, as you can see. Then I have taken prostration, extreme tiredness, and the reason for that, which is the vomiting and the stomach disturbances. All the related rubrics related to the extreme tiredness, gastric disturbances, and the vomiting I have taken in this segment, which I call prostration or the extreme tiredness segment. Then I have looked at the modalities and have put them into a separate segment. So this is a segment which brings it on. What brings it on? The events, modality, circumstances, which is basically rising aggravates, and what that leads to the vertigo itself, the sensation of the vertigo, and then that would in turn lead to prostration. So this is one whole, if you look at it. It is a particular cycle of the person in space and time. So now, when we do when you do a Herscu analysis of this, and I'm going to just show you how we do the Herscu analysis. I'm going to stop the share and share my radar screen. You see, we have these things. I have taken the symptoms. They have all been put in individual clipboards, if you look. Okay. And I come back to the Herscu module. Herscu module has these clipboards, special clipboards called segments, to which you can add symptoms. Okay. And all the symptoms that have been added to those three special clipboards are mentioned here. Then what I do, I select all of them for analysis, and then I do this. It asks me whether this describes my patient. I say yes. I get a bunch of 12 remedies, okay, out of which one of it will be the remedy that I want. Now, if you look at it, there are a lot of remedies. Most of them are polychress. And there are a few which are not polychress, which are rare remedies, small remedies, medium remedies. You have, for example, dulcamera and zinc to some extent, and cadmium sulf as small remedies. Okay. The rest of them are polychress. Okay. Now, what do we choose? How do we choose if we want to be certain that we want to get to the right remedy? Now, I want to bring your attention to another window below this, which not many people know about in the Herscu module. This is the no-sode small and medium remedies segment. And here you see only one remedy. This is cadmium sulfuricum. So now, what is the importance of this and how to choose remedies from all this? One simple way of actually choosing the right remedy from these so many remedies is to look up all these in the Materia Medica and choose the correct remedy. But in cases which are emergencies, wherein you need to be really sure, you cannot probably go, and if this window contains 20 remedies, you can't read up all the 20 remedies. You have to do due diligence and come to a very short list as soon as possible. I'm going to show you now how we are going to come to the right remedy in this particular case in the shortest possible time. So sharing back the screen of my presentation. Here we are. So now we see important here what Dr. Paul Herscu talks about in his course actually. And these are some of the aspects that I have learned from him that I am sharing with all of you. Okay. So what he talks about is that when a certain person has been under treatment with his treating physician for a long time with a certain remedy, it is not advisable to change the remedy unless and until certain things happen. Okay. Now, what are those certain things? Now, those certain things that are basically that his physical generals, his mental generals, and his keynotes change. Only then he needs a different remedy. This is the first thing that Dr. Paul Herscu says. Now, this lady was under treatment from me for she had been under treatment basically for her arthritis problems, and she had done quite well on rust talks for a long time, and then with phosphorus for another long time. So she had been with me for almost 4 or 5 years. Now she had come to me with a distinct different set of physical, mental, and keynotes. And so you can be certain that there was a need to change the remedy. Now, Paul also talks about a different aspect of the case here. He says that if the new symptoms that show up are exclusively focused on one area of the body, predominantly to the exclusion of all other areas, like, for example, the rectum or the lungs, you only have symptoms in this case, for example, related to the gastric disturbance. Even the vertigo is a manifestation of the gastric disturbance. Then this usually points to a smaller, lesser known remedy and not to a polycrest. So now, if we look at this and we keep this prominently, these two things, and we go back to our case, I'm going to stop sharing, and we go back to our case and we look at the small remedies that are present in our case, what do we notice? We notice the presence of dulcamera and cadmium sulfate. Dulcamera is actually not such a small remedy, but even though, if we look at those small remedies, dulcamera is the essence of dulcamera, if you know about it, is basically a certain kind of exposure to cold wetness, which brings on the cold, much like natron sulf, but in a rather acute manner. And so, in this particular case, that was not the presenting essence of the case. The only other remedy that comes up is cadmium sulf. And if you look at it, it covers all the aspects of the remedy. And it covers the modality very, very strongly if you look at it. Generals, faintness, rising, aggravate. Okay, it covers with a degree of 3, high degree of, rubric representation. So now, going back to my presentation. So what do we learn from this case? That we can come to a remedy through keynotes, and not just keynotes, by understanding the relationship of the keynotes and other characteristic symptoms present in the case to each other. And what better way to do this than the cycles and segments analysis that I presented to you just now. You see, now very quickly, I will just go through the essential aspects of cadmium sulf as are presented by Vitulkas. This is present in the Materia Medica Viva. Okay. This is volume 6 of the Materia Medica Viva. I am sure everybody can see it. Okay. It covers the remedies from Cactus grandiflorus to Calcarea sulfurica. Okay. So it's a very beloved acquisition, these books for me. So now, what does he talk about the prominent keynotes of cadmium sulf in the Materia Medica Viva? Now, let me just give you a differentiation between the keynote and the characteristic features of a case. Characteristics features are there. There are a lot of characteristics in a certain remedy. Okay. but there are very few keynotes. Keynotes are those which are present in very, very few remedies. Okay. And not many remedies have them. That is the first important differentiation between keynotes and characteristics. And usually a keynote will have 2 or 3 characteristics. This is again something which I learned from Dr. Paul Herscu. Now, in this particular case, the keynote of cadmium sulfuricum is vertigo because of gastric disturbances and the peculiar vertigo that as if objects are spinning around her. Now, if you look at it, it already covers 2 distinct characteristics. One, the gastric disturbance. The second, the vertigo. Okay, these are 2 distinct characteristic symptoms made into one keynote. So this is what is a keynote. Now, I just want to take a moment to take some time to look at all the essential characteristic features that Vitolkas talks about of the remedy cadmium sulfur. The first thing he says is that primarily it is the mucous membranes of the stomach that are irritated and they react with forceful vomiting. The vomit may be brownish and even black in color and may look like coffee ground. This is because there is a slow oozing of blood from the mucosa of the stomach and the blood stays there for some time before it is ejected. The intensity of the nausea, which is felt all over in the chest, abdomen, mouth, and which is similar to pecon or tobacum, and the kind of vomiting which is persistent and forceful and often black, suggests a severe ulceration with slow bleeding or in chronic cases a malignancy. Now, he says that the cases that require cadmium sulfuricum give the impression that something really serious is going on, not only because of the intensity of the pains, but because of the type and effect of the vomiting. The patient is prostrated from the exertion of vomiting. He wants to lie down quietly and does not want any interference. Okay. He says further, he tries to stop the vomiting by remaining still, but the nausea persists and the forceful vomiting continues. Look at this very important sentence. The nausea is so excessive that vomiting is excited even by something merely touching the lips. So this must be a very, very severe condition indeed. And he says it is found in acute gastroenteritis, yellow fever, cholera, and in acute exacerbation of chronic cases of gastritis, duodenal ulcer, or cancer of the stomach. Clark states that cadmium sulfuricum is a cross between bryonia and arsenicum. It has the desire to keep quiet and the complete aversion to motion of bryonia with the exhaustion and stomach irritability of arsenic. What he says further is that it is very difficult to confound all these 3 remedies because cadmium sulfuricum, even though it resembles arsenic and bryonia, it doesn't have the excessive thirst of bryonia. It just wants to take a few sips, even those are vomited. It wants to lie down quiet. It doesn't want to move like bryonia. At the same time, he wants some company, but he doesn't want to talk to that person like an arsenic person would do. Okay, he wants solitude, he wants company, but he doesn't want the companion to say anything because he doesn't have the energy to even talk or entertain that person. So this is a very serious state. And what Dr. Vitolka says is that in cadmium sulfuricum, the idea of malignancy prevails. This idea must immediately come to our attention. The black vomit, the chill, the extreme prostration, the horror of solitude, and the desire to be left quiet so as to be able to die in peace. Now, as is obvious, when he is in this situation, all this shows that the patient is really going towards death. Now, let's examine some peculiar symptoms of the remedy cadmium sulfuricum before we wrap it up. Peculiar symptom. One peculiar symptom is related to the head. And he says it is not so often called for in ordinary headaches, but in headaches occurring in the low forms of fever with great rush of blood to the head. You see, just like the foot, instead of going down, and there is a reverse peristalsis, what you notice in cadmium sulfuricum is that the blood also, instead of a proper distribution going to other aspects of the body, it is focused and it rushes towards the head. Okay, that is a very prominent symptom, which could have a certain explanation as to why the vertigo happens. There is a sudden gastric irritation, very severe gastralgia that causes reverse peristalsis. That also causes a certain quality or a certain diversion of the blood from certain areas of the body to the head. So this is what I was saying, that the gastric symptoms and the vertigo and even the headache symptoms are kind of related in cadmium sulfuricum. They are not to be seen in isolation. Further, gastric irritation, we already talked about it, but what Vitolkas says is that this is a remedy which can actually save many people, and this is why it is important to know this remedy. And he says, when you have a case of cancer with burning, prostration, and vomiting, cadmium sulfuricum relieves those symptoms for weeks and months, actually. It's a great remedy in the gastric irritation of carcinoma, a great palliative, coffee ground vomiting, whenever that is happening, burning and cutting pain in the stomach, gastric symptoms occurring in pregnancy or old drunkards. So what he says, see here, burning in the stomach extending up into the esophagus, burns, fluid burn all the way into the mouth and throat. So these are the gastric symptoms. Now, quickly coming to the nervous affections of the remedy, you see this remedy, cadmium sulfuricum, is very, very close to camphor. And I'm not sure how many of you knew that. It has the chilliness of the extremities that is present in camphor. You see, what he says, this is something that I found in Materia Medica Viva, but I'm pretty sure it is there in other Materia Medicas, notably probably Kent's Materia Medica. Chill amounting to icy coldness, which is not better when standing near a fire, is an important general symptom. Now, you can understand what is happening with the cadmium sulfuricum patient because of that intense gastralgia, intense gastritis, leading to ulcerations and bleeding. There is a certain amount of energy being diverted or the blood being not available in the extremities. This is something similar to the shock in camphor where all the extremities becoming cold. But in cadmium sulfuricum, we have a differentiation. What happens is certain parts or isolated regions of the body, they become cold or numb. You see, for example, paralysis of one part of one side of the body. And again, he says, after an apoplectic attack, when the patient recovers, but weakness of one arm and leg remains, it competes with phosphorus. Now, Pedrotes reports 2 cases of one-sided paralysis of the face with distortion of the mouth and difficulty in speaking after exposure to cold wind. Now, again, you see cold because there is already very less vital energy here because of the loss of fluids, because of the escape of blood. And more cold, the patient obviously goes into a crisis. Now, you see, the numbness is also there, and there is one particular symptom which Marguerite Blackie recommends the remedy for. She recommends it for rheumatic pains at the top of the spine. She says, I'm always surprised how well it works, especially if they point to one particular part and they say that it is what hurts them. Now, again, if you look at it, why is it that a single part in a spine is hurting? Because of lack of blood flow, because of a certain lack of vitality or vital energy in that part. The blood is not flowing, you see. Something similar to camphor, but here it happens in isolated parts. So again, cadmium sulfuricum is useful when sweat is checked after exposure to a draught of air, which is what comes back to the basic point that there is lowered vitality in cadmium sulfuricum, and he is exposed to a draught of air. That coldness he cannot tolerate and he can go into a crisis. So this is about it, about my presentation. Okay. And I hope you enjoyed this short presentation of the remedy, cadmium sulfuricum, and how we can actually make use of the cycles and segments analysis in coming to the remedy very quickly. Now, I know many of you are still having doubts as to why I did not consider the polycrest. And it is not that I didn't consider the polycrest. Obviously, you do give a glance as to whether the polycrest covers those symptoms. But here, if you look at it, none in this particular case, none of the polycrests covered the peculiar modality of the vertigo. You see, it didn't. Maybe conium to some extent, but then conium doesn't cover the severe gastritis and the extreme prostration. So all of them are not matched. So the reason that I gave you in this particular presentation, that when you see a case which is very, very limited in terms of its pathology, the first thing you should consider is a lesser known remedy or a lesser used remedy, medium remedy, rare remedy. That is something that I'm going to elaborate in the coming videos that I post. But it works well in almost 90 to 95% of the practice. Very rarely you will have a polycrest which does not exhibit symptoms in all the areas of the case. Generally, when a polycrest is prescribed, it would not be a limited case like this. They will have symptoms in multiple organs and organ systems. When you see a case wherein the case is limited by pathology to certain narrow, well-defined areas, you have to consider a lesser known or not frequently prescribed remedy. Okay, so thank you very much. And with that, I take leave. Please press the bell icon and press the like button to like my videos. More from me in the coming days and weeks.